Hi buddy, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a great start to the month of March. This is going to be my February Marginalia video. I like to do these at the beginning of each month and just sort of catalog the short stories, articles, essays, poems, other works that I read in the previous month, and then post new videos about. And then a couple of quick music recommendations in the description box, and I'll mention those, of course, at the end. February is a shorter month, but that doesn't mean the Marginalia was any less rewarding, for me at least. And I'll start off with two works that I will probably post videos in March about, longer videos. So, Hedda Gabler by Henrik Ibsen. This is the Michael Meyer translation. I have found that I really enjoy Meyer's translations of Ibsen, and apparently he has some of Strindberg, so I might be looking, for a copy of those. This is the first time I've read Hedda Gabler. Really interesting. I don't know if it's my favorite play by Ibsen that I've read so far, but it was a very strong play. It was a really, really interesting, dark, fiery play, but definitely one I might reread it before I do a video. I read it like at night, the last night of the month. Malgudi Days by R.K. Narayan. A selection of 32 short stories, all that are set in this fictional town of Malgudi in India, and it's wonderful. I've been reading about one a day, and they just show characters from all walks of life. There's humor, but it's that ironic, wistful without being nostalgic humor that you find maybe in Chekhov. A number of the stories, of course, have sort of like an O. Henry or Guy de Maupassant like twist in them, but I'm really enjoying this volume. I highly, highly recommend it, and I will certainly be reading more Narayan. The Codex Cantina did a great video on Sonny's Blues, the short story Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin, and that sort of had me thinking about just different, different jazz musicians, different artists, and Baldwin is just Baldwin's an interesting writer in how it's always his voice, but he really can sound like a different writer in his fiction and in his short stories and novels and in his nonfiction. So great. I read Where the Tides Ebb and Flow by Lord Dunsany, and it's the third or fourth short story I've read by Dunsany. I finally found a copy of it in the Land of Time, sort of online, and ordered it. And I've read a lot of the writers who come after Dunsany, Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, a number of other writers who sort of used Lord Dunsany as a touchstone. And I'm just curious if other people who have read his works more thoroughly find that Where the Tides Ebb and Flow is representative of his work, if there are other stories you prefer, so please let me know. Within Randall Jerrell's book of stories, I read The Red King and the Witch. Great. It's anonymous, and it's like a tale, really. It's only 6 pages, but it just compresses huge amounts of plot. It has almost this Nikolai Gogol type of supernatural aspect to it with the witch. But then there's this young prince who's going on this quest to try and find a place where nothing ever dies, and making his way to different places that all just feel like fantastic and ethereal and kind of weird. And it's all happening in 6 pages. It was absolutely astonishing. Within the Penguin book of Japanese short stories, I read In the Box by Koko Taeno. It was good. I'm just kind of like dipping in and out of this anthology as well. One a week, one a month. And so far, I've enjoyed it. This one, I spent a bit more time in. Dangerous Visions by Harlan Ellison, the great 1960s anthology of science fiction, and deservedly praised. I read I and Gomorrah, which is the last story in the volume by a very young Samuel R. Delany at the time. Loved it. Probably my favorite work by Delany that I've read, and one of the best science fiction short stories I've ever read. I also read the first 3 or 4 stories in here, so Evensong by Lester Del Rey, Flies by Robert Silverburg I didn't really enjoy. I thought it was quite unpleasant. The Day After the Day, The Martians Came by Pohl, which is a novel idea and kind of pushes at the idea of novelty and what that would look like. And then I've started Riders of the Purple Wage by Philip Jose Farmer, which is kind of a sci-fi pastiche send-up of Finnegan's Wake, and probably more readable and enjoyable than Finnegan's Wake, so we'll see. Let's see. Okay. From the Everyman's Library Ghost Stories volume, I read Uninvited Ghosts by Penelope Lively, which is really funny. Like, how do you try and like get the ghosts out of the house that you don't want there anymore? And also The Open Window by Saki, which is really creepy and weird. Not nearly as funny as Uninvited Ghosts. Now, let's see. Into some poetry. So I'm continuing to read the Psalms in English. I'm up into the, like, right at the turn of the 17th to 18th century in this volume. I'm continuing to just really see how there's sort of a twin development in religious thought, and, you know, you have the strain of how religious thought is shifting in English-speaking areas, and you have this also strain of how English poetry is shifting in English-speaking areas, and it's interesting seeing where they diverge or where they like intertwine. And that's part of what makes this volume enjoyable, is being able to contrast translations of the exact same psalm in a couple of different places and kind of pick your favorite. I've also been reading, dipping in and out of this Middle English Lyrics volume, published by Norton Critical Edition. It's good. These are contemporary to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the Gawain poets, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Much shorter, obviously, more ballads. The rhymes are probably slightly simpler, but it's been fun. It's always fun to read Middle English, just spend some time in it. And then I found this Library of America. They might still be having like a sale. It was like $10 or $12 or something. But it's an anthology of American religious poems from the United States, including at the end there's a whole group of religious poems from Native American people and anonymous ballads. They were traced to enslaved African Americans, and I did not read the long introduction on poetry and religion in the U.S. by Harold Bloom. I've just been reading the poems, and there's many to enjoy. There's one by John Quincy Adams. There's one by Cotton Mather that's fairly weak, but there's a number that are fun. And there's also a number that it's the poem form of various hymns that are still sung in churches today that, I've known for years. And so it's interesting to see them like just there as a poem, not as sheet music. And I'll be continuing to read in that volume. So into some essays. I read the 1938 and 1939 essays of George Orwell in the Everyman's Library edition. And that's interesting, of course, seeing the not just the build up to, but the start of World War II and what's sort of in his mind as he's, been part of the Spanish Civil War, and now he sees armament occurring, and everybody can sense what's happening. So Orwell, very interesting writer. It's of course interesting. There's a little 2 + 2 = 5 reference in here, 10 years before 1984, and the whole question of was that an original reference by Orwell? For those of you who read quite a bit, maybe a little Dostoevsky. I of course finished Reporting Civil Rights Part 1. It's marvelous. Easily one of the top 10 nonfiction books I've ever read. I'm starting Part 2, but also reading Parting the Waters by Taylor Branch's my March of the Mammoths. And this is astonishing. Just like what it includes, the number of voices it includes. It's truly excellent. I'm really glad I read it. And like, if for those of you who are readers, probably the like weird literary detail in this was that when James Meredith enrolled at the University of Mississippi, and they were trying to actually allow him to enroll in what had up until then been a segregated university for the most part. They had tried to keep other African American students out. As the U.S. Marshals were being overrun by rioters and segregationists, the Mississippi National Guard, a unit of it was mobilized to rush in and support the Marshals, and that unit was led by a nephew of William Faulkner, who was actually wounded in trying to help make sure that Meredith was safe and that the U.S. Marshals were not overrun. But this is amazing. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. I read a number of essays from the Portable Harlem Renaissance Reader. They're at the very beginning of the book, and It's interesting, what I like about this volume, one thing that it accomplishes really well, is it shows the divergence of different voices. So it contrasts Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson and even like George Schuyler, who was and is still probably controversial. But really, really great series of essays in there. From my Essential Writings of Christian Mysticism, I was reading the various writings from the Life of Saint Teresa of Avila, and marvelous. Those were really rereads for me. And then I am, in 2021, doing a read-through of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and as I read through it, I then read the corresponding chapters in God, a Biography, so Joshua, Judges, and then into 1 Samuel. I'll be finishing 2 Samuel this month, and so I'll read the 1st and 2nd Samuel chapter. And I don't always, agree with Jack Miles' assessment, but it's certainly interesting to reflect on, on why we disagree with a writer and not just, who we agree with. So that was my March reading. It was really, really fun. In terms of some music, I did watch One Night in Miami, as I think a number of other folks did. So I'm going to link in A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke, an absolutely astonishing song. From one of the greatest vocalists, of all time, in my opinion. I linked a Charlie Parker song in my video on Shadow and Act by Ralph Ellison, but with reading Sonny's Blues, I'm going to link a different Charlie Parker song, one that's a little more bebop instead of Bird with Strings. And then I'm going to link in Power to the People by Curtis Mayfield, possibly the demo, not the more famous track. So that was my February Marginalia reading. And thanks for joining. Let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are.